So at the end of last week, the final item that you were assigned was to view this pretty informative session on open source intelligence as presented by a member of the National Cyber League, the chairman of that organization that uses the Cyber Skyline platform to deliver the NCL Games, which is a capture the flag type competition that happens twice yearly to develop talent in the cybersecurity arena. And then you had this very short questionnaire that you were to answer for your attendance record. Also, you can see that the Think Like a Criminal project was due, and there are a few of you that still need to complete that submission. So that should be a focus of your attention. But today we will move on to a new topic, organized crime and its interconnectedness with cyber terrorism. So we will talk about how the organized crime, which is nothing new, but what is new is their leveraging of technology to supercharge their endeavors. So that said, let us begin our discussion, and it is related to Chapter 6 in the textbook Computer Crime Investigation and the Law. So organized crime, again, is nothing new. These mob gangsters and mafia families have been romanticized as the stuff of legend pretty much since the days of Prohibition. We see them on Netflix series and other series related productions like Boardwalk Empire, The Sopranos. We've seen them in the Godfather trilogy. So just as the internet has transformed what you and I do to access information, how we shop, how we interact with each other on social media, how we conduct business, well, it has also completely altered the world of organized crime. So crime is no longer confined to traditional brick and mortars. While the information and payout that the criminals are looking to attain are a bit different than in decades past, they're still thugs and true criminals. In the 60s, 70s, 80s, the mobsters mainly looked for brute force methods to make money, physical shakedowns, heists, protection money in neighborhoods, Now, however, they have this shield of anonymity of the internet to hide behind. So it took a while for these types of crime families to adopt or move into cybercrime. And it's likely a generational issue, just as the adoption of the internet and cutting edge technologies are for the rest of society. I'm sure we have parents and grandparents who did not adopt a cell phone until many years after the younger generation did. They felt that it was just fine to have that corded phone in the family room or the kitchen. But the very tenets of the mafia and other crime family operations has evolved over time, and they definitely are taking advantage of what an interconnected world has to offer. Entrenched crime bosses probably, in those early days, shunned the internet in favor of what they felt was a proven business model that they had relied on for decades. But as the younger crews elevated through the ranks and eventually took command, they saw the potential, the real power that the massive scale of this network could provide. And they saw that it had significantly less risk of arrest or physical harm because of this shield behind the virtual world. So it's also possible that organized crime online, was sort of just an organic evolution, a logical extension of internet crime as these cyber criminals band together and pool their resources. So whatever explanation we come up with is probably a blend of all of the explanations. And crime of all types, whether it is organized hierarchically in this family structure or just ad hoc, it actually sort of becomes organized to some extent, because everyone has specialization. So you get good at one thing or another. And that being said, criminals, they form these supply chains just like any other business would, and they do what they do best and then hand off other functions to the groups that specialize in another part of the chain. So for instance, one particular cell or group becomes gurus in stealing personally identifiable information, and then they can sell those lists to some other cell or subnetwork that uses that information to actually extort money or load malevolent software onto people's machines. So when we think of organized crime, our minds almost immediately go mafia. And mafia is typically defined as a hierarchical, so think of an org chart, a hierarchically structured, semi-secret organization engaged in smuggling, racketeering, trafficking in narcotics, and other criminal endeavors. And then, of course, you could add in intimidation and other enforcement techniques, and it reaches the levels we have become familiar with on these television and movie depictions. The basic concept of the mafia has evolved to take advantage of the internet. History serves as a great teacher of how organized crime develops and the ways that criminals are able to locate and leverage their desired assets. So in today's world, the internet creates a new playground, per se. They've exchanged their old ways of explosives and guns for the digital brute force attacks and other exploits. They've exchanged their old ski masks and other disguises for the anonymity of the internet. And add to that the ability to resell precious data in the dark and deep perils of the dark web. So no matter what their means of thievery, criminals have the same desired outcomes that they've always had. They want to take advantage of the public for financial gain. So when we think of mafia or organized crime, well, we almost, immediately our minds go to the Italian mafia. But there are reaches to all the ends of the planet. There is the Russian mafia, and we're hearing more about that lately. There are crime networks in Indonesia. There's Korean criminal rings and crime families in Central and South America. So when we were mentioning some of these juxtapositions between the old ways and the new ways, all of these groups have participated in that evolution. So they're exchanging physical explosives for new digital brute force attacks. They're going from the real world with busting in, wearing hoodies and ski masks, to being anonymous behind a a web presence that is fictitious, an avatar. They've traded territory shakedowns for various scams and ransomware attacks that would mimic the physical world business shakedown for a money payout for any products or services rendered. And we could think of protection money in the old way of doing things to be like firewalls in today's terminology. In chapter 6 of the textbook, we are introduced to a story or a historical character, Lee Klein, and we learned that he compromised a database, a repository system called LexisNexis, and stole, in today's way of thinking about things, it might be a small number, but at the time it was significant, about 13,000 records of abuser information, and then sold that information to the Bonanno crime family. We also learn about groups based in the former Soviet Union, so not just Russia, but Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, areas in Eastern Europe, and those groups being repeatedly fingered for various breaches that are occurring over time. In fact, we did an assignment just recently that indicated Chinese were involved in several scams. And we're going back over a decade to 2005, where federal agents conducted a sting operation. Seems like the various federal groups, FBI, CIA, and even the involvement with Interpol have put together many, many different sting operations. This one was called Shadow Crew. It actually was to target a group called Shadow Crew, and it consisted of a group of hackers that were pooling their resources to effect identity theft over and over again. So ID theft, you should have taken this away by this point in time, is the highest incident crime in the e-sphere today. And of course, the end effect of stealing somebody's personal identification is to extort money from that individual, but there are also other reasons why one might steal personally identifiable information. One of those is blackmail. Usually that is also has an end effect of getting money out of someone, but it could also be for corporate secrets. It could be political in nature. The phenomenon is international in its scope. So we have nations warring against other nations where some of the efforts are, yes, to one up another country, to steal its technological secrets so that they could be leveraged in the other nations so that they can raise their standard of living. But it's also, again, ideological, is to just slap each other around. The most common crime, again, is ID theft. But in addition to identity theft, we're also talking about stolen intellectual property. So patents, policies, trademarked information in the pharmaceutical area. And then thirdly, we're looking at extortion, of which ransomware falls into that category. So those are the three main areas of crime that are preferred by the organized crime and cyber mafia groups. So it is important to view the internet component of organized crime, traditional crime, as just an additional opportunity for the criminals. But from on the law enforcement side, we should view that component as also an additional opportunity, but this time additional opportunity to gather evidence rather than a complication of the investigation. Ransomware is a big deal, especially, in the healthcare, education, county and state government arena. Having your systems just suddenly inaccessible is a crisis, no less than that. And various contracted investigation groups, analysis organizations have determined that fingerprints, digital fingerprints are all over these ransomware attacks, and they point directly to organized crime. There was an analysis done not too long ago, And the infographic that you see on the screen right now sort of summarizes that there were 670 victims who actually paid a ransom in the Bitcoin or other encrypted financial instruments area. There were 140 front-end wallets, 11 back-end wallets, and at the time, $337,607 attributed to the ownership of those wallets were organized crime elements. So let's look at a definition. Okay, the FBI has defined cyber terrorism as the premeditated, politically motivated attack against information, computer systems, computer programs, and data which result in violence against average citizens, non-combatant targets. And these are done by sub-national groups or clandestine agents. Now, this is a decade old, but in 08 and 09, there were reports of attacks on systems, mostly tracing back to South Korea and China. I do not believe that the trend has faded in any way. If anything else, it's growing, with many of the attacks emanating from the Far East. The Air Force has put actually a fair amount of efforts into cybersecurity. And in 2006, so 15 or so years ago, they announced the creation of the Air Force Cyber Command. And the function of that particular entity was to monitor and defend American interests in cyberspace. And we know now that under the Trump administration, that a new armed forces entity was put into force, the Space Force. And the main focus of that new branch of the military is monitoring the cybersphere. So possibly a better name than, the Space Force might have been the Cyber Force, but it is what it is. The Air Force Cyber Command is one that draws on personnel resources of the 67th Network Warfare Wing, and I think some of that has peeled off to go into this new branch, the Space Force. Also, the Department of Homeland Security, along with the National Security Agency, collaborates, cooperates, and puts a lot of efforts into cyber security and the national defense that goes along with that. All the way back to 2009. So under the Obama administration, there were a variety of cyber attacks on government websites, our federal government, the Pentagon, the White House, and those were traced back to South Korean origin. But in addition to those attacks, there have been many, many others. So in addition to the desire to do real physical harm, there is another, parallel attack vector in the information warfare game. And that can entail the spread of what we call disinformation. We hear a lot about fake news. Well, fake news isn't a new thing. It has been around for decades, where enemies desire to mislead or propagandize in order to undermine their enemy, either undermine morale or mislead about economic conditions, about social unrest, or the other direction, social stability, so that their enemies are confused and in disarray. So one of the first ways in which the internet was used in information warfare is in that particular arena, that propaganda arm of the internet. You know, as well as I do, that in addition to what we call vetted news sources, there are many, many organizations that have popped up across the internet that are independent in nature and mainly are what we call shock news. So my advice to you, and it's my advice I use my own self, is to always read multiple sources of information to try to weave together an element of truth. It's true that everyone views the world through their own lens, and every stakeholder in a situation has their own viewpoint on things. And that said, what is true is different based on an individual's paradigm or worldview, what they're seeing in front of their eyes right now, and there are many other things they may not see. So that is why we always should read many, many different interpretations about any particular news event. Yes, disinformation, fake news, propaganda has been used widely, and we see in it spoken about all the time when it comes to political elections, especially presidential news cycles. And it is not going to change. Do not expect anything to suddenly mitigate that. We talked in a couple class periods ago about the importance of data privacy, and this goes hand in hand as well. Everything that our economy runs on is information. And that said, it needs to be cared for and protected in the utmost way. So even those that are white hats as opposed to black hats, there's always a bit of obfuscation and confusion between the two. Law enforcement agencies use disinformation, use fake websites, fake ads, and other techniques to rope in and capture criminals. Some of these things may edge on the entrapment comes to mind. So law enforcement officials do need to be careful in how they conduct their businesses. And that's where the legal scholars are important as they come in and mix into these interactions. So when we talk about computer crime and we talk about investigation, that it is always important to also talk about the law. And these are sometimes at loggerheads with one another. People with good intentions sometimes cross lines in an effort to, their zealous nature comes into play. And that's why we will be talking about the various laws and policies that restrict as well as assist law enforcement. Because we have freedom of the press, and that includes freedom of information display on the internet. It is often used to feed misinformation to criminals and terrorists in order to either sweep them up into a sting operation of some kind, or to sway their efforts in a wrong direction. So just be aware of that. Cyber espionage. This is a very something that's of great interest to organized crime groups. And as I mentioned previously, often organized crime groups compartmentalize and become specialists in a very particular area. One cybercrime gang may only involve themselves in theft of credit card information, for instance, and then they sell that those stolen numbers in bulk to another crime group whose specialty might be to produce counterfeit credit cards. And the theft of intellectual property is a tough thing to break, to nab the bad guys, so to speak. And this whole theft of information plays into this topic of espionage. So it's generally believed in the security expert arena that companies have actually purchased information from freelancers without, asking where that information came from. So it's like, talk to the hand kind of thing. But that kind of vetting should be taken a bit more seriously. SANS Institute, which is one of the leading firms that looks at cybersecurity and provides training and expertise. They ranked cyber espionage at the #3 position of all the threats on the internet. Now we're going back in history here, but GM and one of its partner vendors investigated one of their former executives, Inaki Lopez, and GM alleged that Mr. Lopez and 7 other former GM employees had transferred General Motors proprietary information to VW. And they used, so it was an insider operation in exchange for, a huge payout. So we're not even isolating these criminal operations to some sophisticated technical breach of our systems. There are actual insiders that are misusing their authorities. So it is a very tough world out there. Theft of intellectual property, including this example here with GM's intellectual property, proprietary information about how their firm operates that could be used by a competitor, but other intellectual property as well. It's a tough area to crack. And the largest category of this theft of intellectual property is the illegal reproduction of copyrighted works, including software, theatrical productions, musical productions. It's a typical, it's a tough concept, can be, for some people to grasp the value of a digital product. I mean, how about you? Do you see the same level of, are you aghast as deeply when a friend or a neighbor or a family member copies a MP3 music file without paying the price? And would you find that as distasteful as that same friend or family member or neighbor stealing a bracelet from the mall jewelry store? The values may be similar, but it's just difficult for people to wrap their head around digital assets. And the market for stolen intellectual content is so large and the profits so easy to generate that this area is just ripe for growth. CIO magazine, which is one of the go-to magazines for business news, examined the issue of government-based cyber espionage, and it's really, the issue's really not changed, even though this article's getting a little dog-eared. But the article discussed the possibility that the Chinese government was indeed behind a infiltration of over 1,000 computers in over 100 countries with spyware. And you know that this problem hasn't been solved in the last decade. So the point is, everybody is spying on everybody else. Some of that spying is, we'll call it semi-legitimate, in terms of wanting to understand for marketing purposes the behavior of customers and clients. But more often, that spying is for deeper, darker purposes, in the theft of information, in monitoring end users' behaviors so as to profile those individuals and then package targeted attacks against them in either phishing attacks or fake websites, etc. So that is the beginning of our discussion about organized crime. And we see we sort of bled the discussion into just national, nation state against nation state crime activities, but they are all interconnected, whether it is an independent, non-sanctioned organized group that is using the internet and internet's resources to traffic, to steal information, to have networks that have supply chains for their illicit goods, or whether it's nation states fighting against other nation states. The techniques on the apprehension side are similar, and we will continue this discussion in our next class period. If you have any questions, you can always pop those into the chat, or shoot me an email offline if you have any questions about assignments that were either just past due or will be coming due in the next week. All right, all for now. We'll see you next class.